Okay, so welcome to part 3 of the Power of Now series. In this part, we're going to be talking about pain, mental suffering, and how it can all be avoided. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, I'd urge you to check those out. If not, you'll still understand it, but not to the depth of if you watched at least part 2. But let's get right into it. So the majority of human pain is avoidable. So let's start off with some examples of some unnecessary pain that we experience and that is avoidable. So, for example, suffering because it's too cold or too hot outside. Suffering because things didn't turn out as planned. Recoiling at an unpleasant sound. Having discontent with our lives because we're not in good shape, we're not healthy, or sticking to a diet. Worrying about a possible future event. Having remorse for a past situation. Having regrets. These are just a few examples of the avoidable aspects of human suffering. But most people take these situations as the norm because everyone around us is suffering from these things. So let's start out with defining pain. By knowing what exactly pain is and what it's derived from, will help us understand how it's possible to eliminate all this suffering. In short, pain is some form of non-acceptance or unconscious resistance to what is, or not allowing things to be as they are and wanting them to be otherwise. In regard to thoughts, this means judging something. In regard to emotions, this means having negativity. And this isn't just an all or nothing. It's not that you resist what is or you don't resist what is. There's a varying intensity. This intensity depends solely on how much you resist the present moment. So let's relate all this to the previous episodes where we talked about the ego. Freedom from the ego is equal to acceptance of what is and free of pain and suffering, whereas identifying with the egoic mind is equal to resistance of the now and suffering. Why does the mind default to resisting the now? Because it can't exist in the now. Remember from the last episode that the mind can only be upheld through constant thought? Therefore, it's constantly thinking about the past and the future. If the mind does happen to look towards the present moment, it needs something to think about. Therefore, it puts labels on the present moment, such as labeling hot and cold temperatures as negative, saying to itself, I need better weather, or I hate that sound. And as soon as the mind starts labeling what's happening in the present moment, you are by definition resisting the now. Now, I hope you understand to a greater extent why having no resistance to the now is a threat to your ego. So in order for the mind to remain in control, it seeks to cover up the present moment. A large amount of our pain can be attributed to the past, since we tend to be stuck in the past for a large portion of our day-to-day lives. Therefore, pain also exists as an accumulation of past pain. The pain you've experienced in the past starts to build up as you continuously think about it. You start suffering for no apparent reason other than because you've suffered before in the past. So what's the solution? Don't think about the past or the future except for what is absolutely necessary to deal with practical aspects of your life, such as planning or learning from past mistakes. So let's go more in depth into the topic of past pain. As Eckhart Tolle said in The Power of Now, as long as you're unable to access the power of now, every emotional pain that you've experienced leaves behind a residue of pain that lives on within you. End quote. To further its existence, the ego identifies with the collective whole of the past pain. Your sense of self is invested in it. As soon as you start identifying with past pain, the mind doesn't want you to let go of it. The ego derives a peculiar pleasure from being unhappy. It doesn't allow you to stop suffering because to stop suffering would risk the survival of the ego. So, to solve this, observe your attachment to your past pains. Once you put your attachment to pain in the light of consciousness, it will cease to be. Resistance will be let go. Now let's talk about our innate background fear that is always present in our lives. So we're in a constant state of fear. separate from any concrete and true immediate danger. This fear is always in our life because the ego is very vulnerable and insecure. It sees itself as constantly under threat or of possible future threats. The fact being, you can always cope with the present moment, but you can never cope with a mind-made projection, which is the future. Therefore, trying to cope with the future creates this background fear in our life. Remember back to the last episode when we said that an emotion is the body's reaction to the mind. If our mind is in constant fear, then what does that mean for our emotional and physical well-being? It means that our fear will manifest in many negative forms throughout our life. A prime example of this is in an argument. Thinking you're right even when you're wrong. Having a strong bias towards one way and never considering that you may, in fact, be wrong. Why does this happen? It happens because the ego identifies with a position. When you identify with a position, if you're seen as wrong, then your mind-based self, the ego, is seriously threatened with annihilation. Once you disidentified from your mind, it doesn't matter to your sense of self at all if you're right or wrong. Your sense of self is then derived from a truer and deeper place within yourself, not from the mind. This is the end of arguing and debating with each other or with others, and rather having constructive conversations. Once again, witnessing our tendencies, witnessing our innate fear, and putting it into the light of consciousness will help to eliminate it. The final aspect of pain that we're going to be talking about is that lack of wholeness that we all feel. In order to fill this gaping void, people will strive for money, success, material possessions, power, recognition, etc., so that they can feel more complete. But as long as the ego is running your life, you cannot be truly at ease, only for very short intervals when you've been gratified. Only when you're able to disidentify from the ego will you feel complete, whole, and fulfilled. And then our successes in life will be just icing on the cake. When conscious, just because you become fulfilled despite any outside influence doesn't mean that you stop trying at life. Just because you're already happy and whole doesn't mean you can't still strive for success and progress in the world. No, it only means that your happiness will no longer depend on those outside external conditions, and rather your happiness will only be found inside, bound within your deepening relationship to the present moment. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Please, in the comments below, write what past pain that you felt that now you realize can be avoided through a deepening presence in your life and becoming more conscious. Also, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of new videos released in the future in this series so that you can make sure to stay up to date on the series. And I will see you guys all in part 4.